Welcome to the first episode of The Socialist Shelf with me, Jacob, and also with my partner here, if he wants to introduce himself.
With me as well, Joss Olson.
Yep. And we're here, to talk books, talk novels, talk fiction. This is our first episode, and so it's probably going to be fairly rough. That's just how it is. It'll be okay. We'll figure this out as it goes along. We're going to figure out the dynamic, but I think it's going to be fun. What do you think, Joss?
Oh, absolutely. I was especially with this first book that we've settled on. I'm looking forward to the catalog certainly, but especially like I was surprised by how quick a read this was.
It is. It's like really, if you had a day to read, like you could do it in a few hours if you really had uninterrupted time.
100%.
Not only in the sense it's not very long, but it's also just not particularly dense. Which is that not to say that it's not very theoretically rich, but we will get into that. Like to give a quick summary of ourselves without going too into personal details and whatnot. I'll start. I am a writer and a researcher. I live here in Atlanta, Georgia, and me and Joss are both political organizers, activists, and we both we both come from the socialist camp, the socialist intellectual camp, which is where this podcast is really going to be going. It's going to be, not particularly like a current events kind of political podcast or anything of that nature. There's certainly a million and one of those. What we're really trying to do here is to talk about novels from a, historical materialist in the Marxist and Hegelian sense perspective, and really get into the weeds of, a novel's context, the themes it's working with. Yes, like just basics on it, but also, its political relevancy, the ideologies at work, that sort of thing. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. If maybe a little dorky, a little nerdy, it's going to be fun though. Joss, what do you have to add on that?
Oh yeah, well, dorkiness, nerdiness. I mean, that's it's just a way of saying that you have powerful and abiding interests. And everybody throughout history has had some form of that.
Absolutely.
I want to make a note as well that I'm reading it here on Project Gutenberg. So like if you're if you're referring to like page numbers, how I have it organized is just by chapters, and then I can just control F relevant words and phrases. So
yeah, that totally works. And we do want to say that of course you definitely should read the book. This is a fantastic book. I don't know that I'm going to necessarily say that about every single book we read, but hopefully most of what we read is great. This book is great. So I definitely recommend you read it before listening to the episode. That said, if you have not read the book, we are going to try and, explain the plot some. We are going to try and let you know. I'm not encouraging you to just listen to the episode and then act like you've read it to your friends so you can act smart, but you could do that. That is allowed.
We have all been there. We have all, buffed our resumes. We have all, tried to appear more knowledgeable than we actually are at parties,
Naturally. I mean, I was in an English program in college. You can only read so many books in a week.
Oh yeah, that was my degree as well.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Let's start off with that. Let's start off with some basic plot summary. If you haven't read the book or if it's been a while, need a refresher. We can just sort of go back and forth here. It's not an overly complex plot. Joss, you want to start with that?
Yeah, it's essentially I had it pitched to me as 1984's kind of prettier relative, and certainly
and earlier.
Yeah, earlier as well. Yeah, it did predate it by about a decade and a half or so.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's certainly much more readable. It's certainly much there's certainly sad and shocking and in places scandalous things, but it's more fun to read, and it's certainly a lot funnier. But yeah, to get into the actual plot, it's set in an Earth that's basically dominated by one world government. The action is centered on London with a brief jaunt to New Mexico, specifically to a reserve of people that live outside of the current structure. And there's one world government, world order ruling everything and keeping people in a strictly stratified caste system. You have alphas up top who do all the planning and all the intellectual work, and then you have epsilons and gammas like down at the bottom that are literally bred for like lower intellectual capacity
Yeah,
and
they give
for
them
menial
fetal
labor.
alcohol syndrome on purpose.
Yeah, that's which oh man, I mean, and there's and even that has I mean, I mentioned to you my favorite bit of the book later on has something to do with that, but we'll get into that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
people are literally bred, they're grown in factories. That's where we open the book, which is very interesting. The book opens in a factory with characters that we really don't see much of. For about 3 chapters, we don't really get introduced to the main characters or the plot because it really wants you to get a sense of this world that's set in the 2500s,
Hmm.
about 2540, I believe, if you do the math.
Yes.
They're in the year 632, which is AF after Ford. They really like Henry Ford. The assembly line is revered as godlike. So when the Model T was introduced, that's when their calendar starts, which is again very funny.
Oh yeah. And you mentioned as well that there's still crosses around, but like the top's been shaved off, so it's just like big old T's, and like literally in human language as well, it extends to even like Charing Cross Station is Charing T now.
Yep.
Which
And they say instead of "oh God," "oh Ford," that sort of thing. That's their sort of expletive they'll say all the time, or "Ford bless you," that sort of thing. If they, instead of crossing themselves when they're scandalized, they make a T. And of course, it's a hedonistic society, in the sense that is a society all around what probably Henry Ford would have liked: mass consumption. Mass consumption is the law of the land. Literally, it is the law of the land. Despite being a one world government, it is hyper capitalist. It's not the sort of authoritarian state of 1984 that's sort of regimented consumption and rations. No, this is a free for all you can eat all year round, complete gluttony. Just a smorgasbord of sex and drugs and food and just everything you can to distract you really from your own subjugation. And we have our main characters. Our main character is Bernard Marx, and he is he's an alpha. He's upper caste, but whether by some accident of his birth or just bad luck, the fella is he's a little behind. He's not as developed. Yeah, he's short. He's physically short, and also he doesn't approve of the society he lives in, to say the least.
he is what certain online people would call a manlet.
Yes. He and he kind of channels that by resentment.
Yeah, which I found quite funny. There's a contradiction there that they've never quite been able to breed out of people. That's actually a result of that that kind of conditioning. Like you condition people in these castes, and you from a very young age you inculcate them with these messages. Oh, I'm glad that I'm here in this caste, and I'm glad that I'm not in this lower caste. And of course the lower castes are taught to be glad of their lot. And yet still, like, as a result of that, any sign, any anything that might indicate that you're not where you're supposed to be, like, immediately draws scorn and suspicion and derision. I mean, people are still happy to by virtue of Bernard's caste, like, welcome him into their sex parties and whatnot, but like they're always behind his back. Hey, is he really an alpha? Like, so that's just that kind of, it's one of he's a pretty good introduction, I think, to all those like various prejudices that still haven't quite been able to be processed out.
Right. And sort of as a foil to him for a lot of it is Lenina, who is this girl who, she's perfect by the society standards. She's hooking up with everyone. She's doesn't pay any attention to anything important. If someone tries to talk about important things, she just calls it absolutely dreadful. She rolls her eyes. She takes drugs, soma, which is really the preferred drug of this world, which is a sort of magical drug with none of the, not literally magical, but it seems magical by our standards. It has no hangover. It has no negative effects. You're not going to die of overdose. You're not going to really, it's not going to ruin you in any particular way, besides the fact that you just really enjoy being on it so much that you don't care about anything else, because if you have any negative emotions, the contradictions can be worked out with soma. They really say, like, all the time. I mean, these kids, when they're sleeping as children, in their ears, it's telling you, you love soma,
Mhm.
talking about you can get rid of a bad day with a gram of soma.
A gram is better than a dam. Yeah,
A
that's what they say.
gram is better than a dam. They say that a lot, which I don't really know what that means, but it's
I mean, you give a damn about things. That's the source of all this. Like that's your attachments. And
yeah.
your those trappings of sources of distress or of any strong like positive or negative emotion. That's considered gauche to have those things.
Yeah. Regardless, Bernard and Lenina, they go on a trip together because Lenina, she kind of takes a liking to him, which is she's looked down upon for, but she does it. And they go to what they call the Savage Reservation in New Mexico, which is one of the last places where people are living. I mean, I won't say free, because they're caged in inside this awful, reservation land, but they are not under the control of the one world government, in the sense that their lives are dictated to them. Now, if they violate, the boundaries that have been set, they'll gasp on them. It says, and they're given the worst possible land. So to call them free would be wrong, but they're probably some of the freest people in this society. And they're not any one particular group. They're Puebloan peoples, but they're in New Mexico, and they sort of have like Native American folk religion. They also have Christianity in there. It's a variety of things. You can tell things have evolved over the last few hundred years. So they've absorbed Christianity and whatnot into native religions, and you have different tribes who've sort of melded by necessity. And this is this place they visit that it's already kind of looked down upon them to visit, but they meet John, who is then arguably also the protagonist. Really, Bernard kind of, by the end of the book, takes a backseat to John. And how would you describe John, Josh?
I mean, John is, he's born in he's born in the wrong time, like some people say, oh, I was born in the wrong century. Like he's and that's by virtue of his circumstances. Like a source of comfort to him and of edification is this copy of the complete works of Shakespeare that he gets his hands on.
Yeah, and to be clear, because I don't think we said specifically, John is the child of a lost member of their society. John is not a native. He's the child of a woman who was lost and left on the native reservation. So he is an Englishman living among them, though he never lived Englishman. As an Englishman, he was taught by his mother about the other society, and doesn't fit in, culturally, personally, or ethnically. I just wanted to note that. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I don't think we said that specifically.
Yeah. So he kind of has his foot in both worlds there. But to sort of follow on from that, right? He has the language, he has the curiosity, certainly. So he doesn't have the kind of insularity of this the reservations population, but he also hasn't been inculcated from the very young age to be as hedonistic and uncaring about and incurious as you would have been if you came from the quote unquote civilized world. So he's got that foot in both worlds. He combines that kind of intellectual curiosity with a very with a what this world would consider savage appreciation for physical labor and hardship and overcoming daily challenges. He
Right.
doesn't
Right,
he doesn't he doesn't come from subscribed to a society that solves everything.
Right. He does dream of the outside world, because his mother, who was raised in it, does teach him, oh, there's this better world where everyone has everything. They don't have to work hard. They don't have diseases, things like that. So he does dream, and he does feel, left out in this native society naturally, because he doesn't come from there, and people are naturally suspicious of him. But he is, like you said, in both worlds, and really doesn't belong in either of them. He does, have this deep love of, the mystical and of art. Obviously he's got the complete works of Shakespeare, and that hits the name of the book, which comes from Miranda's speech in The Tempest, which says, "Oh, wonder how many goodly creatures there are here, how beauteous mankind is, oh, brave new world that has such people in it."
Yeah, in which the and if you're a reader of Shakespeare, the irony of that should clue you into some rude awakening for him right away, because when Miranda says that, who's she looking at? She's looking at the monster Caliban. She's looking at the clowns that he's been clowning around with.
Yep. But and so it has that it has that double meaning, and there's a lot of Shakespeare quotes peppered through here, and they do a really good job of working it in, and it really is the foundation of John's mindset. Interestingly enough, John is almost a perfect foil to Bernard. I said Lenina was, but he also is physically. John is described as tall and tan and strong, long blonde hair, like the internet Chad archetype almost. Like he's this perfect man that Lenina is immediately just absolutely swooning when she sees him. He's described as physically impressive even by the native standards. He when he wants to do physical tasks, like he's just breaking into houses and jumping through glass windows and stuff like that. It's just a problem to him, just casually.
Do you know what I thought of when I read his description?
What?
Did you ever read? Did you ever see the miniseries of Gulliver's Travels in the mid-90s on NBC?
No, I don't think so.
If you look up Ted Danson Gulliver's Travels, like that's what I think of when I think of John. He's got that long hair, he's got the chin that you could grind meat on, break a fist on.
I'm looking at it right now. That's so good.
Right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. He's he's like this perfect chiseled guy. Like he's at the right age that the rest of society, idolizes and uses all their medicine to keep him at. And he, interestingly enough, has come by that, quote unquote, honestly. He has come by his beauty honestly. He has come by his intellect honestly. He hasn't, as a child, just been indoctrinated. He hasn't been given drugs to become who he is. He is who he is through, labor and struggle. But that doesn't make him perfect. He is wildly imperfect. Though, the first few chapters, you might just think, oh, he's this sort of confused guy, fish out of water character, but he's, perfect. No, he's kind of a bad guy in some ways. But that's, neither here nor there. To move on with the plot, they leave the native reservation and they do take John and his mother because they don't belong there. And they become something of celebrities. Well, the mother doesn't. She basically just overdoses on soma and lies in a coma for a month.
And it's really like it's in the space of a paragraph or two, like she's written now, and that's not to say that she's done dirty, because she's done dirty by the people of this version of London, but like she's explicitly kind of sidelined and ignored because she hasn't had those treatments that you mentioned. She hasn't had those like those youthening sort of so like the narrative describes her as like hideous to these quote unquote civilized people, right?
It's interesting. They say, why is she so old so often? She's 42 years old.
Yeah, which is not old at all, so it's a very like it's Hollywood ugly run amok,
Yeah, absolutely. She's 42 and they describe her as fat. I honestly, when I'm picturing her, I can't imagine she got that fat living on a native reservation. She's just probably got natural, is just sagging in natural places because she hasn't gotten crazy procedures done and has lines on her face. She's just a normal woman. Maybe had a hard life, but not she's not like some freak of nature that they all want to act like she is. And she thinks she's a freak of nature, and she believes that, and she dies believing that. It's really horrible, her death scene, which we'll get to. I would say spoiler alert, but this whole thing is that.
Oh yeah, spoiler alert for a 90-year-old book.
Yeah, spoiler alert. We said at the beginning we were going to plot summarize. So they get back to London, and John, who they all call the Savage, is a celebrity. And they use that word savage a lot, describing them. They have a very basic understanding of even where he comes from. I think they don't really even know. They're just like, oh, it's interesting. He doesn't get society. And, Bernard gets a big head for the first time in his life because people have to pretend to like him to hang out with the savage. And, he knows dang well that these people don't like him. But, he doesn't really care. And the only person that the savage John really gets along with properly is Helmholtz? Helmholtz, which is John, which is a professor who writes, propaganda, basically films and pamphlets, and the professor knows very well that what he's allowed to write in the society sucks. It's not good.
Yeah, and he straight up tells Bernard, like I'm doing, I'm going through these motions and I'm doing nothing with my life.
Yeah.
Like he has some sense, and it's interesting because I'd have to read through it again, but you wonder like, does he have this kind of inborn sense, or not inborn, but like, does he develop this sense that there must be something out there because he's writing this stuff again and again, and that's just like the lot of a creative, or like because that's some common ground that he has with John, certainly, is because John has access to the complete works of Shakespeare. He has access to what people consider the pinnacle of the written English word, but with none of the context to really give it meaning. So they basically have two different shards of this funhouse mirror that they're looking in.
I kind of have a theory on Helmholtz, and it is this: Aldous Huxley was briefly a professor, and he was pushed out of the college for his ideas, and basically he even moved from where he was to find a better place to write, which is what Helmholtz eventually does. I kind of feel like he's a bit of a self-insert character for Huxley in this book, in the sense that not that he's like some like perfect whatever, but like there is like a level of Huxley is also this professor who's pushed out of school for he's remarkably talented, and that's acknowledged by everyone, but he's constantly being told, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, red tape everywhere. And eventually he leaves England for America for a variety of reasons, and Helmholtz eventually leaves London. The connection seemed a little I felt like I saw a connection there, but Helmholtz is not really a super defined character aside from just sort of their friend who talks to them sometimes, which I kind of actually thought was a bummer. I thought he was interesting, but
yeah,
you could really, honestly, this book could be twice as long
if it were about Helmholtz Watson. Yeah.
The book, but like, yeah, no, the book could be like, you could have a lot more plot in this book. I respect, honestly, that they didn't, but part of me does like crave like, oh, let's have more of this, that, and the other. And then a complete plot line I'm not even thinking about, which is kind of a C plot until the very end. But John's infatuation with Lenina. Do you want to talk about that? Because I've been running my mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's they're both kind of they both got it kind of bad for each other, right?
Oh, yeah.
But from a very well, it's two different like superficial kind of infatuations, right? Because he falls in love with her pretty much the same way that Romeo falls in love with Juliet. He sees her and she's this beautiful thing, and he's like, oh, I have to know more. And she sees him and she's like, man, I want to hop on that because he's the physical ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. And she comes from a society where if you see something, you get it. You want it, you get it immediately. A random character in the book describes the worst feeling he's ever had is he liked a girl and he had to wait 3 weeks before she would sleep with him. Like that was the worst thing they had ever experienced in the sense of wanting something and not getting it.
Fellas, am I right?
Yeah. It really is. So she, doesn't she doesn't understand when she comes on to him why he is cautious, because he comes from a monogamous society, and also he has complicated feelings. She honestly doesn't have very complicated feelings. At least she doesn't understand her feelings that are more complicated. Whenever they come up, she drugs herself until it just becomes base instinct.
Oh yeah.
Which she eventually drugs herself to the point where her friend says, whether he wants it or not, go take him.
Yeah. Which I found, I mean, she wouldn't.
Scary. Yeah.
Yeah, it is scary, and like it's weird because like they wouldn't have the concept of rape in this society, right? You know, because it's just
really.
so, you know, yeah, you just see somebody, and then yeah, you know, like obviously for, you know, this guy was complaining that this woman wouldn't sleep with him for 3 weeks, so you know, there's like stuff that comes up, I assume, like scheduling wise, because everybody's conditioned to you know, to view sex as just this, like, you know, very casually recreational thing.
Yeah.
But like to even,
and not at all in a freeing way, by the way, in a way that it's like not in a sort of like free love hippie thing, more of a like more of like they say all the time, everyone belongs to everything else, like it's your duty.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, well, if you take enough drugs, you will.
Well, yeah, and that's
actually
the thing.
Maybe that
like,
is a little hippie. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing. Like, it's interesting to me that like she has to drug herself up to work up the courage to, you know, as her friend says, you know, to go and have her way with this guy. Like it's I don't know. Is that another hangover from is that another hangover from the old society? This awareness that this is like not something that you would necessarily do in your right mind. Like,
no, she's still, that's the thing. She's still human,
right?
Which is why she has to drug herself, and that's what they really are aware of, and they are striving to create a society without any kind of contradictions, without any kind of problems, where all the gears turn perfectly like a perfect watch. And they still have to smooth out the edges with little things like Soma, which, you know, they hate that. They wish they didn't have to, really. And I say they very broadly. The people who really founded the society run the society, which we'll get to when we talk about my favorite character. But at the very end. No, she, you know, and we can go ahead and hop onto this, but she comes on to him, and he has a very aggressive reaction to her and quotes Shakespeare and calls her a strumpet, which I do need to work that into my vocabulary. Strumpet, fantastic word. not in this context though, because he does hurt her, which is not good. Though it's like it's such an over the top scene. She comes with like a level of like aggression towards him, and then he responds. And he likes her, but he feels like she's doing something wrong because that's what he's been taught, and he doesn't really understand. And so he attacks her. It's a really like, it's a very horrible moment in the book.
Yeah.
And it's also one of the most explicit moments in the book, like describing what's happening. You know, the book implies a lot of sex without describing most of it. It's one of the most explicit moments, and it is intentionally, I think, completely uncomfortable. Like, unless
absolutely.
you're an absolute freak, you are not like, ooh, this is nice. Like, this is cool. Like, whatever. It never really gives you the opportunity to enjoy the horrible hedonistic pleasures of the society. And this is a moment where they really hammer that home. And, you know, I appreciate that, you know, just from a writing perspective, what they accomplished with that. I mean, describing like little details where she has a sailor's cap on for some reason. It's very weird.
Yeah, that was man, that was
random almost.
Yeah, what chapter was that again? That was one of the like it's mid to late.
Yeah, it's mid to late, because really a lot of the middle chapters are just sort of, well, here's, like we said, this isn't a particularly long book. You know, there's just sort of John, you know, meeting everyone and talking about poetry, and then you have this, and then it really moves into the finale after that. I mean, it's a rapid book. People have tried to make TV series of this, and I have not watched any of them, but I have trouble imagining you can make even a season of a TV show. Like 10 one-hour episodes sounds difficult.
Yeah. There was that one that I learned about just today, that broadcast on Peacock last year.
I didn't see it, so I cannot speak personally against it, but the reviews were pretty bad.
It was canceled after a single season, so make of that what you might.
So how are you going to make multiple seasons? That blows my mind. Miniseries, maybe. but there's not a lot of plot in this, and also I feel like adding plot would be almost sacrilegious.
Yeah, like it's very short and to the point, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
but okay. After that, we've got the mother, right? That really is what happens next.
yeah, Linda, who dies in that coma state, as you mentioned.
Man,
God,
she has a
that's
moment of consciousness before she dies, and it's
mhm.
awful. If you want to describe that,
Yeah, it's I'm looking at it right now. Like
yeah,
she's in that like coma. She sees the Pope was the kind of guy that she lived with, right?
yeah.
In the
Pope is this
reservation.
guy that she like sort of had a relationship with while she was in the native reservation. It's
Hmm.
unclear exactly how deep the relationship went, though John did hate him. I wanted to talk about him, but I just have so little to say. He's just sort of
Yeah.
he's like a sort of stepfather, divorced mom's boyfriend resentment figure.
Yeah. So yeah, he doesn't play that big a role, but yeah, ultimately, like he has that formative sort of effect on John,
Yeah.
that yeah. So she sees him, like, it has a moment of lucidity, and then, like, as yeah, she literally just kind of chokes to death on her own, like, I don't know, her own spit or
Saliva, I
something.
guess.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah. Yeah, her hands went to her throat, then clotted the air she could no longer breathe, the air that for her had ceased to exist. Yeah, that's what it is. And it's
Also,
yeah.
like, I don't want to I don't the text doesn't say this explicitly, but it does say when you're on that much soma, like every second's like 100 years. So like I imagine that was like way worse for her
Oh,
subjectively.
dude. Yeah,
It's hard
yeah.
to imagine.
There's
It doesn't say it. It lets you just sort of know it, but like she's because they said, well, a month of soma overdose is like an eternity of pleasure, but like that's also an eternity of pain in those like final moments.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's no like there is not a single moment of, well, she lived a good life. There's not a single moment of, well, I mean, John loves her, but not a single moment of, well, she was a good mother. No, she was a bad mother. She lived a bad life. She died miserable and alone. Like, and that's what this society does to everyone,
Yeah. Yeah.
ultimately.
And as well, I mean, you see it in the ending of chapter 14 here. That's the one. There's this group of lower caste kids that comes in to be death conditioned, to be sort of inured to the concept of people shuffling off the mortal coil, as
Sure.
John would say. And that's the nurse's concern. Not that you're killing this woman, not that you're, as you correctly point out, probably subjecting her to centuries of torment. No, you're gonna decondition these kids by showing this person passing into maybe the worst death in decades in this particular society.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be peaceful and druggy, and it ain't.
Yeah. It's fascinating because it's their take on it is Huxley walks the line of utopia at moments to make it extra bad. A society in which death is normalized as a natural process, that is good in the sense of a person doesn't have to fear death.
Right.
But he changes it from, you don't have to fear death because it's a part of life, and we have told you about it and we've been honest, to, you don't have to fear death because you don't matter at all.
Right.
And because you are part of a social organ, not in any way that you're working towards any collective project, but because you are, just one of so many, bacteria eating up the world, because you are just a sort of a meaningless cog. And death isn't scary, but not because, not because you've lived a fulfilling life, but because, that's just sort of a thing that happens and you don't have to think about it and whatever. Like, he walks the line of what a good society would do, but then like does the, I don't know, Wario version of it. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Because it's you die because you live in a society that explicitly rejects old things, and when you become useless, it's like that. I can't help but think of that first episode of the Amazon Prime Man of the High Castle. When the
Right.
policeman is like, oh yeah, the smokestack there, it's where they burn the old and the sick because they're a drain on the state.
Mm-hmm.
Like, God in heaven.
I will say, I do have to point out, this is an important piece of literary criticism. You did say we live in a society, and I do need to address that.
We do,
Or
we do. You
you
know, I
said,
back.
yeah, or you said something along those lines, and I just feel like that's very important. We do live in a
I've
society.
I've got the paint right here, right here.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that we live in a society. Really, it is funny because that is the core of every dystopian piece of fiction.
Hmm.
Is saying we live in a society.
I do, and to tell you what, like what you say about introducing the walking the line of utopia, to then give us the whiplash of, oh, like it's because it's fundamentally different from the just like the horror and the misery that Orwell weaves
Right.
into 1984.
Absolutely.
Because you can get, I mean, you can get kind of inured to it as you read 1984, like, the to the point where I feel like the line that the I can't remember his name, but it's the person who tortures Winston in the Ministry of Love, right? Like that line about, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever has just kind of lost its impact, because you know we could get into how like we could get into how a state oppression works and how mundane it can really be, but as opposed to just like one thing or another for its own sake. But anyway, like the I gotta really like, and of course this predated what I'm about to say by several years, but I got a really Willy Wonka-esque kind of vibe from the first three chapters of this book.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let me
it's
let
the
me think on that for a second.
yeah, well, because it's
Yeah, no, the opening chapters really set the scene, the stage generally for the entire work, really so beautifully, and in a way that I don't know how many books have ever pulled off. I mean, I'm having trouble imagining as a writer waiting, 3 chapters to introduce any characters who will be relevant to the story.
yeah, and you really, I mean, I'm gonna put on my pop lit crit hat here. Like, the
Yeah.
world is itself a character, like it spends, and it spends,
Yeah.
but no, I'm serious about that though. It spends the first three chapters really kind of immersing you in this world that, for all intents and purposes, works a whole lot better than what is it? What is it called? The country where 1984 is set, right? It's not plagued with shortages.
Eurasia? No, or Eurasia's the enemy one. It's
Yeah, there's Eurasia, there's
Oceania,
East
I
Asia,
think.
Oceania. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, so it's in this as you say, Huxley's walking the line of utopia here, right? Like, so it's everybody's generally happy, of course, because you see you're seeing these grad students walk through the hatchery building, so you're a really well functioning and like trains running on time part of society,
Yeah.
and the director of hatcheries and conditioning is walking them through all this, and this is how we grow all the fetuses, and this is how we condition the like really young ones, and he's having fun with them. Like he's saying, he's talking about how it used to be, how like people used to do like a viviparous reproduction, which is just like giving live birth and whatnot, and
No,
everybody's like,
this is the part that has one of my favorite line in the not my favorite line in the book, but the funniest line in the book to me is
yeah,
he's talking about the past, and he casually throws out, of course there were casualties. He says we had to gas 2,000 culture fans. And that
oh
is such
yes,
a funny word term, culture fans.
culture
That
fans.
that that at a museum, he said that I laughed like culture fans is such a dumb. It's just the way they talk in this is so casually like funny,
Oh
um,
yeah,
and
just
not funny, but like it's very amusing, um, in a way that really really, I think that other dystopian texts that are, 1984 and children of 1984 really don't understand is that dystopia and terrible things have a inherent insanity to them, an inherent ridiculousness. A bad society is a stupid society in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, and stupid things are funny. Like
Oh yeah.
ultimately, a lot of the time, not all the time, and not all of this book is funny, naturally, but like dumb things or things that are ridiculous that require you to sort of violate your human principles are a ridiculous enough that they're borderline slapstick at moments. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and I can see it playing out in my head. Like as you know, if you had told me that, if you told me that Huxley had written this after like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was written, and meant this is kind of a pastiche of
Yeah.
like walking the kids through the factory, where if you make one wrong move, you can be like stuck through a pipe or whatever, and something horrible can happen to you. Like I would have 100% believed you, because you have, you have the whiz and the click, you have the sound effects of all the machinery going off, and you have the Department of Hatcheries and Conditioning head joking around with the grad students. You just have the very like that atmosphere of like wonder and whimsy, and very casual sort of joshing each other.
Yeah, if you fall in love, you can get really hurt in the factory, as a specific scene later in the book shows.
Oh, dude. Well, I
Someone else can.
yeah, I don't think. Well, I don't think I'm thinking of the same thing you are, but like what I'm looking at here right now is you know, it's that like weird like sort of words. It's that kind of funny they in the first chapter where like you don't really know ah if you're somewhere you're not supposed to be, right? And it's just kind of awkward at first,
Yeah.
um it's that in like a benign way, and then chapter 2 comes, and then they torture the babies, and then it's
I
like,
was
oh
referring to Lenina accidentally forgets a vaccinated child, and the child dies of sleeping sickness.
yes,
in
like
its
22
20s.
years later there was the first sleeping sickness death, and he just throws out there casually because like that's what happens when she's just like thirsting over John, like
Yeah.
it's very, I mean, it fits with the world's like, very sort of cavalier attitude towards death and waste and whatnot, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so to really wrap the plot up, as we said, John's mother dies, and John freaks out, which is a natural reaction. Like, and the book does everything to make you feel like it's unnatural. In fact, I'm uncomfortable. I'm like, John, chill out.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, like, who in a situation, where everyone is telling you, chill out, man, when your mom dies, wouldn't react, aggressively, like,
Oh yeah, it's the ultimate gaslight,
he's frustrated, he's mad, which leads to him throwing a bunch of soma out the windows, the drug soma out the windows, because he's like, y'all are drugging yourselves out of imagination. It leads to a riot of people angry that they don't have soma. The police come in, they settle the riot, they arrest John, they arrest Bernard and Himholtz, who come in to try and stop John. And then we get to meet my favorite character in the book,
Yes.
also probably the worst guy in the book, morally, because he's actually making moral decisions versus everyone else, basically. Mustafa Mond, the world controller. And this is very much the equivalent. In fact, I would be shocked if the fire chief in Fahrenheit 451 wasn't directly based on this guy. The guy in the society who understands how it works, who actually has the knowledge of the protagonist, who isn't brainwashed, who fully understands, who has read the literature, literally read Shakespeare. You have this guy, and you don't know what he looks like exactly, because but he's physically imposing. He's got this booming voice. I'm imagining like almost like an Idris Elba type, like
Idris Elba, or maybe a younger Christopher Lee.
Yeah, something like that. Some big voice, physically imposing, eyes like daggers. Mustafa Mond, like, what a great name. Which, fascinatingly enough, did you know that Aldous Huxley worked briefly at a chemical plant, and it was called Brunner and Mond.
Okay.
and it was a plant that he called Order Among Chaos, because this was in the days of the early 20th century, and that is no accident.
Mm.
And Mustafa Mond is this guy who's the world controller for Europe. He runs, he's I don't know if it says specifically how many world controllers there are, but there's only a handful. He's one of the great kings, essentially, who rule the world in the like Revelation style of the 10 kings who will reign. Like he is without question, to the point that he's read, Shakespeare. He's read the Bible, the Quran, things that are banned. And he fully understands all this stuff. He doesn't give me the impression of a guy who takes Soma. I don't think he takes Soma.
No, I don't think. I think he's too intellectual for that.
He understands how society works. He was a guy in the position of people like Helmholtz and like Bernard and like John, who questioned society, and they gave him a choice: exile, or why don't you become one of the world controllers? Because at the top, there needs to be people who understand what's going on. There needs to be people who sell their soul. Mm-hmm. And he gives just a fantastic philosophical defense for like 2 or 3 chapters against John, just back and forth dialogue, a defense of their hedonistic, destructive, soul-sucking society, to the point where, like, I wouldn't want to debate the guy.
Oh no. He's memorized all the talking points, he's carried out all the experiments, as he mentions, that are set up that are I mean, I don't want to get too into it, but he's completely comfortable in his position, and the systems that he governs are they're set up to reinforce that caste system, and they're set up to reinforce his own security at the top.
Yeah, naturally. He talks like, from the beginning, he talks kind of like he was, I was down in the dredges back in the day. Keep in mind, the society is made of people who are genetically engineered. He was born an alpha plus. So like, to keep in mind, he was born as in condition to be a professor of the sciences. So like, from the beginning, he does have like these personal biases of thinking that he like, not that he didn't work hard, but it's the rich kid who sort of worked hard but also got handed everything. You know what I mean? He did both. Yeah. He is genuinely intellectual. He is genuinely a hard worker, but he also, like, he was given the benefit of being an alpha plus in the society. So you can give it that perspective. But he gives this defense of the world, which can basically be summarized as: everyone is happy. No one is passionate. No, there is no great art. There is no great there is really no greatness at all.
Yeah, civilization has no need of nobility or heroism.
No need of nobility, no need of love, no need of parenthood, no need of passion, no need of goals. He even says, oh yeah, we've been impeding scientific progress for a long time.
Oh yeah, well, and that's what, because again, it's I alluded to it earlier with the torturing of the infants. Your babies of a certain caste are conditioned from birth to reject, to hate, to fear literature and nature. Not because like you specifically needed to like make good workers you could keep in a factory somewhere forever, although they certainly did that, but because like they used to send lower caste people out to nature to keep them like quiescent and whatnot, and to keep them happy. And they're like, you know what? Sending people out like encourages them to consume transport and fuel and whatnot, but it doesn't. What's the line? A forest doesn't drive consumption or something.
Yeah, they're not paying anything, and they're also spending time in quiet reflection.
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
Of course not making any money.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a thing the book never addresses, because it doesn't have to, right? Because it's writing towards people who live in a capitalist world. It never addresses why anyone cares about making money. It never addresses what the end goal is, because as Mustafa Mond makes clear, there is no end goal. right? They're not working towards anything. They're not working towards any ends. They are not trying to get anywhere. They are not trying to grow. They are a society that is, of course, impossible. But Huxley isn't writing a book about what the world's actually going to be like in the 2500s. He's writing a futuristic depiction of aspects of the world he currently sees. That's the important thing about dystopian novels, most of them at least. He is trying to make a world without contradiction. He is trying to make a world where the rules of the dialectic, the rules of things smashing into things and creating new things just don't happen. Things don't smash into things anymore. The gears are completely loose. Everything's perfectly lubricated. It will self-run ad infinitum into eternity. Everyone is happy, which he doesn't. Well, one thing he doesn't do is really properly define what that means. Now, they are happy in the sense that they are sensually enjoying themselves. They are their bodies feel good. Their minds, what is left of them, feel good. They are obviously more than sexually satisfied. But and this is honestly maybe the most interesting thing, when they get to the soul, whatever that might mean, and Huxley isn't really settling on any one thing of what that means. I mean, Huxley, being a Hindu convert, is very fluid on the idea of the soul. Mustafa Mon says, "Oh yeah, I believe in God. I just don't think it matters."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, man, I don't. It speaks for itself, and like it's fascinating.
Well, yeah, and from a very early, from a very early point in the novel, like it's a Mustafa Mond is a he knows how it works. He says, in a properly organized society as ours, there's no need for passion, nobility, heroism. It all runs very well. Of course, men and women have to have their adrenals stimulated from time to time. You have to have like moments of like feeling and very controlled sort of passion to keep you going. But
yeah, like the orgy that Bernard has to be in every
precisely
month. Yeah.
The orgy and the like conga line that's like the 12-person quasi religious experience that they have.
So weird.
Yeah, it's so odd to visualize, but it's the how sharply it flies in the face of what makes, to the extent that there is such a thing as human nature, how sharply that society rejects human feeling and thought and whatnot. You really see it. The line that encapsulates that jumped out for me was right after that infant conditioning scene in chapter 2. What was it? What man has joined nature is powerless to put asunder, referring to associating pain and fear with beautiful things.
And interestingly enough, a quote from the Bible that is twisted, which is what God has joined, man is powerless to tear asunder.
Yes. It's I know it from the Ode to Joy. You probably do too.
Yeah.
Deine Salbe binden wieder was die Mutter streng geteilt. It's not something that's beautiful and universal that any human construct can't supersede. It's whatever's good and right and unites people and makes them basically good and seeking their own betterment. We can burn that out.
Yeah. It's fascinating. John argues with him, and I would say John, obviously they lose in the sense that they're not going to win, but I would say John kind of loses the debate, really. Everyone's just kind of ushered out of the room. John doesn't, exit looking great. Bernard actually exits being dragged out because he's just crying and no, actually I want to go back to my old life, which he, repents of eventually. And then this is the part that really, the first time I read it, I was like, what in the world? And I've seen even threads online of people trying to explain this away. They don't kill them. John and Helmholtz and Bernard all get to live. Bernard and Helmholtz are told, hey, we actually have islands for people who don't like our society, and you can go move there and be with other intellectuals and chill there. Actually, which kind of island would you like? Pick out a climate. Now John is not allowed to because they're interested in him as a social experiment. But I found that fascinating because the first time I read it, I was like, well, at the end of this, they're all gonna, get shot in the back of the head. And it was and I've even seen people online be like, well, actually, they secretly got killed. And I'm like, well, I don't think I don't think so, because why would they need to be secretly killed? Mustafa Mond has no need to do that.
Yeah, there's no need. There's no need to, because again, like it's you kill them, and then what do you do with the bodies? It's where do you put them? I mean, I know. I mean, I'm sure these people have all kinds of headcanons and theories, like, oh, you could just incinerate them and whatnot, and have people
But
conditioned in
what's the
that
point?
way.
Mustafa Mond doesn't have to lie to
Exactly.
anyone. He could kill him
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, if there were a point to if it was a fundamentally like a repressive society that like wielded power for its own sake, like Oceania does in 1984, the police would have just shot everybody up at the riot scene. Instead they gas them with soma, and they broadcast like, hey friends, just settle down, let's be excellent to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just put, if they put things down with a minimum of fuss, they will, and it's like in the same way, like, okay, so there's people who are just not satisfied with this. Okay, well, we have ways of dealing with it. We have reservations that we put you guys on, and then you're out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it's like I didn't. I really wrestled with why Huxley chose to do that, because the more brutal ending, and maybe even the more realistic one, is they all just sort of get killed. But I think, and what I really think it is this is a society, above all, not obsessed with authoritarianism, but obsessed with everything having its place.
Mm-hmm.
In their ideal world, there would be no objectors, but they would like to sort of put them somewhere if they have to, this sort of exhaust pipe. And there are these other islands, and they're like, okay, we'll send you there. And it's so strange that it's allowed. I don't really have a great walk away from it. The only thing I can think of is sort of like this concept of liberal sensibility, the idea of the soothing of one's own morals. Even at the top, the world controllers can tell themselves as these intellectuals who think they're controlled by no one, no, we're good people because this is what we do with these people. And I think this is like sort of the final step of they get to have their own little moment of I'm a decent person. And it makes me, happy in a way that that Helmholtz and Bernard are going to get to go somewhere, and good for them. And I'm interested what Helmholtz wrote there and who he shared it with. We don't learn anything about that because we follow John, who runs away into the wild and gets surveilled, by a ton of people. And John is like, I'm just going to live the rest of my life as like as a monk, or whatever, like as a guy who heavily embraces pain and the bad things in life, because I want to experience the world fully, and I want to pay for my crimes against Lenina and against my mother. And he what crimes he perceives against his mother, his real crimes against Lenina, his crimes against his mother, I find to be sort of self-inflicted. And he stays in this lighthouse, and everyone films him, and he follows through these religious practices that he got from the natives, and notably the practices he follows through are actually Christian practices, Puritan practices. Yes. But the natives have adopted them of self-flagellating, of whipping oneself. And he does that over and over, and they film that, and they're obsessed with that. And they're, even his moment of solitude is ruined by mass media and obsession, and even sexuality, as these people turn it into a sexual act. These hundreds of people watching him start replicating the act, but turn it into an orgy. It's truly horrifying. And he realizes there is nothing he can do to escape this. Lenina comes to visit him one last time, and he attacks her. He's at this point, he is, he attacks her again. At this point, he's just fried in the brain. And, the novel ends up with him hanging himself.
Oh yeah, yeah. It just concludes with that really starkly painted scene of him just his feet
east to north to south to west to north
just
to east,
just swinging in the wind, just rotating.
Yeah, and that's how it ends. And it's
bleaker, I think, than He Loved Big Brother.
Yeah. It is we can imagine Bernard and Helmholtz happy in some capacity, but John, the guy from outside the society, the real human being, really the only real human in the novel, the guy who was not grown in a vat.
Mm-hmm. And
aside from some of the natives,
and society's only real brush with any kind of challenge or hardship, or any sense that there might be something greater. We don't know what people see when they go to the reservation. Largely they just go and they watch people living their lives, and aren't these people filthy and quaint? But there are people who actually go to lengths to observe this guy. There's the filmmaker who really gets into the nitty gritty of nature, and endures this or that discomfort getting the perfect shot. The patience and effort phrase that is used to describe John's daily sort of fulfillment, comes up again in fairly short order in reference to that one filmmaker guy shooting the documentary film. So in a way, John, you want to believe that John has some potential to bring out the best in people, but the activities that they don't have the capacity or the introspection to do anything beyond observe this guy, and turn him into entertainment. That's the tragedy.
He brings out the best in one person, and it's Helmholtz, who is already questioning the order. Bernard really gets lumped in by accident. Bernard really tries to walk it back. He apologizes at the end, but I don't hate Bernard, but he's kind of a loser. Bernard honestly is I honestly feel a lot of connection between Bernard and Winston in 1984.
Yeah.
Just kind of a guy who would be like an incel if he lived in our world,
Oh yeah. And of course Winston sells out Julia in the same way. Spoilers for 1984 as well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, 1984, it is what it is. But and I'm sure we'll hit that one at some point. If this project continues, which hopefully it does.
Indeed.
But what I was going to say about John, his ending and him killing himself, I was thinking about it a lot. The first time I listened to the book when I first did it. I was working as a dishwasher, and I listened to the book. And so I didn't have I actually would recommend anyone listen to the audiobook. It's on Audible for free if you have we're not sponsored, so whatever, but I don't know if you can get anywhere else. I don't care if you pirate it, but if you have Audible, I think it's free if you have that. It's one of the Audible classics. The guy who voices it does a really good job of some of the voices and the back and forth, and I really enjoyed that when I read it. But the suicide at the end, I just kind of felt it was oh, okay, and it ended sad. I didn't feel that deeply for it. I felt like it was kind of a shoehorned in ending. I didn't hate it, but I was all right, that's the end. When I reread it, and I read it myself this time, I felt that they couldn't have ended it any other way. I can't see another ending to this book, unless he wants to promise a better world, which he does not, because this world is not a world that is meant to be the world we live in reflected, but rather the end state of the path he saw the world he was living in on. It was the final doom. You know what I mean? It was the conclusion of the path Aldous Huxley saw them marching towards. Like, it is an almost inescapable once you get there. There's not going to be a revolution from this necessarily.
Yeah,
Everything's figured out.
and you get a sense of you certainly get a sense of his thought processes, I think, because he lays it out in the first few chapters, right? The oh well, there's this and that advancement that was made here, and didn't really catch on immediately, but then was picked up once war and contradiction got to such a point that people decided to abolish contradiction altogether. I'm thinking of like Hypnopedia right now. The like sleep conditioning that happens to people, like how it was discovered and then it wasn't really taken seriously, and then people came to it once there was, I don't want to say a collective decision, because like there was a whole war involved to abolish nations and set up this new world order. But like he certainly I think he certainly had the sense that like pieces were falling into place, as you say.
Yeah, no, precisely. And Aldous Huxley, writing this novel is writing in the 1930s. What year did this book come out?
32.
It was 32. So it was a time of economic hardship in Britain where he lived. But of course, it was also a time, you coming out of the Gilded Era, which he lived in. The guy's born in 1894. He comes of age in the Gilded Age, which, we talk about in the United States. It was very much a thing in Britain too. He's living at what is both the peak and the decline of Britain's empire. And he conceives of this world that, if the world doesn't destroy itself and doesn't go somewhere better, it concludes in this place that we see in Brave New World, in this place that really there is no escape from. The warning is really don't get there. So John's suicide at the end is really the only response he can have, because he tries to live the life of a monk, of an ascetic, of a guy who has rejected society, and that is merely part of the spectacle. In fact, it is amusing to them. It is a new thing to them. And I'm not saying it's good he killed himself. I wish he hadn't. I'm not saying like, the only solution is in-state capitalism, kill yourself. Of course, that's not true. But my point is, it is an essentially airtight society that has been created here with everything thought of. The solution in Huxley's mind is not to overthrow the world of Brave New World, but not to reach the world of Brave New World. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because there's that there's that sense that like this is what will happen eventually for the world to kind of come out of the state of conflict that it's in. But like for such a person as John, like it would be for such a person indeed who retains their humanity, it would be anathema.
Yeah. So now we've given the plot summary, and I just want to give a little background on Aldous Huxley, which maybe I should have done in the beginning. We're going to figure out this format better as we go on with this project. If you're listening now, you're at day one before we become the biggest podcast in the world. I'm kidding. Number one, baby. Aldous Huxley, born 1894, England, son of a schoolmaster and a scientist. Whole family scientist oriented. All his brothers, they become scientists. He wants to be a doctor, but he goes blind. He actually retains his eyesight, which is very interesting. Blind for several years, retains his eyesight, but it keeps him from enlisting in World War I. It keeps him from being a doctor. Fascinating. And so he ends up being an intellectual, and of linguistics. He teaches French, I believe. Yeah. He teaches French at Eton College, where Orwell attends. George Orwell, who he is a
teacher of, right?
Yeah, he teaches Orwell in French. He's considered a rotten French teacher. He's not a good teacher. B, he's just always arguing with people. He's there because he enjoys being an intellectual, not because he particularly enjoys the, day-to-day life of a college professor. So he's kind of pushed out, but he stays in contact with Orwell. They're not like best friends or anything, but they stay in contact. He then works for a chemical plant, Brunner and Mond, and he said it was order among chaos. He also said it was Brave New World's basis in some ways. The factory scenes in it very much based on his time there. Then he works as a farmer for some time. So he has very much a working class background, despite being, relatively privileged. He's worked with his hands. He's worked with his mind. He's undergone physical disability. The guy, he's had a very rich life, even by his 20s and 30s when he writes this book. After he wrote the novel, and I find this interesting because he, writes the novel's published in, I believe, 32. He moves to the U.S. in 1937, where he lives for the rest of his life. He becomes Hindu, and he becomes very obsessive about, Hindu religiosity, spirituality, transcendentalism. He actually, interestingly enough, does Hollywood screenplays. He helps work on films like Alice in Wonderland, which is very cool. The guy uses almost all of his money to help get people out of Nazi Germany, which he for only a few years was independently wealthy, and he spent that entire fortune really getting people out of Germany, artists and Jewish people and communists, anyone he could. He later on, really his writing slowed down of his novels later on, but he was very deeply involved in Hindu circles. He briefly was offered a knighthood and rejected it, never said why. Interesting. Yeah, very cool. That's a cool thing to do. It's cool to be a knight. It's even cooler to reject a knighthood, I think. And I like this. He wrote to Orwell on 1984, and he said that it was a triumphant novel. However, and this is quote, within the next generation, I believe that the world's leaders will discover that infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis are more efficient as instruments of government than clubs and prisons, and that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging them and kicking them into obedience, end quote.
Yeah.
He was not necessarily right about narco-hypnosis, but he was right about everything else.
Well, yeah, because it's so much easier to, propagandize and to condition people into thinking that, well, this is just the way that society has got to be. As we've been having conversations lately about, about how people get lulled into complacency here in the United States. It's not necessarily that if you're privileged in this society, you'll never see the poor or the struggling. It's that you'll see the poor and the struggling and the homeless. You walk by them every day, and then you'll just be like, well, there's nothing we can do for them. Well, perhaps they did something that made them end up where they are. It's
right. And if you do have that moral qualm, if you do have that itch, you can always turn to a million and one distractions. Soma, not really Soma, but Netflix, freaking social media, or even better. And Aldous Huxley couldn't have even predicted this. Now you can feel like you did something for them by posting for them. It's fascinating, the sheer amount of keyboard warriors out there who can say, oh, this homelessness is an injustice.
Oh man, Bernard Marx, right? Our protagonist here,
he would be such a Reddit king.
He would be a poster. He would be a poster among posters. Dude. And like
all
Huxley,
my upvotes to Bernard.
I can just see Huxley describing the like sensual thrill that he gets from people liking this meme, and be like, man, I've had this impact. I've had a ripple effect that like it's God. But yeah,
I described Mustafa Mon as a soy jack, and so now I can go to bed happy.
Oh yes. And that's the thing, like Huxley was absolutely right, is that like it's such a a more efficient, certainly as I think we're seeing in today's world, not necessarily sustainable, but a much more efficient system of oppression and of repression is one that people are convinced to be complicit in. Not one where everybody's like surveilling everybody else, because that's that goes like ad infinitum, but one that people just don't question because, oh well, it must be worse out there. It must be worse on in this book, the reservation in New Mexico. In this world, whatever country we decide we don't like.
Hey, well, that is the end of part 1 of this episode. Now I know what you're thinking. Jacob, where can I hear the rest of the episode? That's awesome. Go right now, back to the feed. Episode 2, it's up. Part 2, Brave New World. Check it out. See you there.